Hello to all. Welcome to the second edition of the UNICEF podcast. My name is Veronika Vashenko and I'm the head of the UNICEF office in Kosovo. And today in studio, I'm with the first employee of UNICEF in Kosovo, Flaka Surroit, who is also the general director of the KOHA group. Flaka, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
80 years ago, UNICEF was established. In 1946, our organization was established as emergency fund to help children. In Kosovo, we started to work in 1995. But my first question to you, Flaka, how did you hear about UNICEF for the first time?
We actually got to see the sign of UNICEF when we were children, and there was traditionally the postcards for the New Year's were always being sold on the street. And I don't know why, for what reason, a contingent of these postcards with the UNICEF sign on the side would always be present on the streets, and they were the most beautiful ones. So we would pick them and always turn it back and see for a sign. So we identified the sign as UNICEF, as an organization that is dealing with children, but that was about it. So you can imagine it was a child at the age of 5 or 6 or eventually 7 when we discovered it.
And then in 1995, UNICEF started our operations in Kosovo. And you were our first employee here. How was it, Flaka?
It was by chance, actually. I was in 1995, I was already 3 years in a contract with UNHCR office in Pristina. And they were very late in promoting me. They kept me at a very low GS level, and in a sign of a protest, actually, I applied the last day when the advertisement was put asking for a professional officer that would work with the Pristina UNICEF office, which was not existing, actually. That's a different story to explain, but the presence was actually to have somebody in Pristina and do the operations for UNICEF. So I applied the last day. I was called to the interview in Belgrade, and coincidentally, it was all the candidates that had applied that day. We were traveling on the same bus.
Okay.
And half the way, the bus breaks down. And then we find a way how to come to Belgrade with a 2 or 3 hours delay, and I was the first one to be interviewed. And it was interesting because there was a human resources officer from the area office. His name was Gulati, and he was from India. And I had a lot of problems understanding him because his English I was not used to his English. So I had Dr. Popovic, who was the health officer in the Belgrade office, translating for me. Okay. So he was doing the interpretation and asking the questions. So the interview went fine. And honestly, I did not believe that I would be hired. And then I thought that maybe the moment that triggered the changes in the interview was that they were asking me, how would I reach out for the population? How would I inform or disseminate the informations that were related to UNICEF programs in conditions when we did not have media in Kosovo at that stage. And I said I would use the satellite TV through Albania. And I guess that was the difference, that was the point that made the difference, and they hired me. So I resigned from UNHCR and started working in Pristina in the building of the Institute of the Public Health here. There was an agreement between the governments, so the institutions had to give you a space free of charge. So we had that. There were 2 or 3 offices. It was completely no furniture in it, no table, no computer, nothing. I had no car. So it took me some time until I went to Belgrade, got myself a Jeep that was not a Jeep, and then a couple of desks and chairs. And then that didn't last long. Say 2 or 3 months later, I was told that I had to go to Belgrade because my contract said that my duty station was Belgrade. It was not Pristina. So I went back to Belgrade. And that was a long, complicated story that had a happy ending at the end.
Thank you, Flaka. Preparing for our podcast today, I asked my colleagues who had privilege to work with you how they see you. And some of the adjectives they used were as following: strong, principled, inspiring, very fair, tough, and definitely committed. How do you see yourself during that time in UNICEF?
Well, thank you for the attributes. They are nice. Well, I was not giving up. I was persistent that I should go back to Pristina. And it took me 8 months to actually convince the office in Belgrade that the operations in Kosovo should be run from the Pristina office and not from the Belgrade office. I was committed to whatever we were doing. I was running 4 programs on my own, so it was quite sort of difficult taking care of health and children in extremely difficult circumstances and education, and this kind in conditions in which it was quite difficult. So the idea was, okay, this is a huge name, it's UNICEF, it's here to help the children, and we have to find a way how to do it. And the difference came when the vaccination happened, the polio vaccination, the eradication campaign. And I think that this was the turning point, and then everybody would go back to UNICEF asking for assistance regardless of the fact that we could not, because we had some limitations to whatever we were doing. But until then, it was like fighting back. I need to come back here because the problems were in the field. They were not in the office. So after 8 months, I returned and I was given the post in Pristina.
I do have a question about that famous polio vaccination campaign. But before that, I want our audience to learn a little bit about you, Flaka. Can we talk a little bit about your childhood and your parents? How your parents influenced who you are?
Well, I was born in Pristina. My parents are... They were both born in Prizren, so they were members of a young generation of professionals that graduated from the university in the 60s. So we're speaking of a situation in which the Albanians had very few people who had university diplomas at that stage. Just for a comparison, when the Second World War ended, Kosovo had an 80% illiteracy rate. So it took them a lot of time to actually overcome this situation, and this generation of people were the first ones who established the institutions that would be running the then autonomy of Kosovo and now this country, because they actually were the ones who put the foundations of what we have now. So both of my parents, they were young, ambitious, they were hardworking. Both of them graduated. They both graduated in Belgrade because Pristina did not have a university at that stage. And then they returned back and they were working on the construction of these, of the establishment of these institutions that we have, like the radio and, the university, and then the academy, and then a lot of other things, cultural institutions and so on. And my father, while my mother was working in the museum, my father was more engaged from journalism, passing to politics and then diplomacy. So I was lucky to have been raised in a family that had a chance to actually live some time abroad. And I've spent 8 years outside of Kosovo, finishing part of my elementary school in Bolivia, and then the whole of the high school in Mexico. But then I decided to return, and I said to my parents, I'm going back to Pristina, and I'm going to study in Pristina, regardless of the quality of the university, because everybody was criticizing it. And I said, I don't care, because I want to study in my language. But then at the end, I became a lawyer and never practiced as a lawyer. I did a lot of things in my life, but never as a lawyer. So that was it. So, of course, the influence of my parents was there. They were what they were trying to tell us, and they did actually, is that whatever we are doing is for the benefit of our own country, first of all. And if we want to go ahead, we have to, apart from educate ourselves, also contribute with our work to whatever we have now. And I think that their message has gone through. there were chances that we had to actually live abroad, have another perspective of life, and both my brother and I decided to remain here, and we do not regret this decision, regardless of how difficult times can be at some moments in which you say, maybe I should have done it differently, but no regrets. We're fine.
Good you didn't. Also for children of Kosovo, for all the work you did with UNICEF. So you speak Spanish?
Yes, I do.
Did you use it during your time in UNICEF?
Only when there were visitors coming from Spanish-speaking lands.
So getting back to UNICEF, can you share with us a specific moment from your times with UNICEF 30 years ago, which was particularly moving and unforgettable for you?
In our emergency operations was something that UNICEF does not do generally in the field, which was direct intervention with medical teams. And that was a very good decision, and it was a decision that we took because we saw that there was no other way for us to reach the children apart from creating medical teams in conjunction with Mother Teresa Association and their health department. And we would go to the field on daily basis and, offering medical support to children and to mothers and whoever was there, because we were not selecting the patients. You had 250 people approaching you in the mountains saying, look, I do not feel well, can you help me? So that was very good. And of course, the most beautiful if I can say, most beautiful memory from that part of our work was actually rescuing Mirisha from the mountains, a woman who was pregnant, living in very bad conditions in her village, and she was carrying twins, and she was anemic, and she had a lot of problems, so we took her thinking that she would deliver the babies within a couple of weeks. And it happened that she was in the 8th month, so we had to wait like a month and a half in the hospital until the babies got delivered. But they were still premature. They were small, so they needed to remain in the incubator for another month. So we had Mirisha there for 3 months. And Gazmen Bunyaku and Gens Gemaili, which were two of the team members with whom I worked all the time, they would go and visit Mirisha on and off and take things to her and some food and so on. And when the day came for us to return Mirisha to her village, I asked her, what are the names of the kids going to be? And she said, well, we have discussed it with my husband. It's going to be Endrit and Gentrit. And I said, Endrit, Gentrit? I said, you had Gaz and Gens coming to you every damn day. I think that they deserve to have the names of the children. And she said, well, let me see. I will go back to my husband and I will discuss this. So 5 years later or 3 years later, when we went back to the village, now I was working on a different project and we were reconstructing the school in the village. Mm-hmm. We went to meet Mirisha and her family, and we had Midaim, who was the husband, carrying 2 kids. One was blonde and the other one was like dark-haired. And I said, Midaim, these kids? And she said, you know their names. And I said, which is which? He said, the blonde is Gens and the dark one is Gaz. I said, well, you just switched them a little bit because it should have been the opposite, but it's fine as long as the names are there. So now the kids are, I think, almost 30 years old. And it was the best, I think, the best episode that we could talk of while smiling and laughing about it, because there were a lot of other episodes which were very ugly and they were very, very, very sad. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it. It's very moving indeed. And can you give us more names of your colleagues, just to give face to UNICEF team back then, and what was special about them?
Yeah, well, the first one to join me, actually, when I started the presence in UNICEF, I had a driver called Brzim Kaitazi, who is now in New Zealand.
Okay.
And the secretary working with me was Zurata Bütycik, who is now working in the Swiss office, if I'm not wrong, Swiss embassy, could be, I don't know, whatever. So when I came back to Pristina, the first one to join me was Gazmend Bunyaku. Gazi was an architect by profession, and he was a very good driver. So I needed a driver, and I needed somebody who could do all, because we did everything, carry things, go to the field, talk, take notes, whatever. So there was no like specifically saying you're the boss and these guys are your assistants. No, we were functioning as a team. The second one to join us was Gens Gemaidi, because we got a second car, so we needed another driver. And then the team was joined by Fatmir Kasabachi, who is now your oldest staff. And we had Dulzim Chedai joining us later as an assistant that was dealing with health issues. And the last one, and then Blerim Sokoli joined us. He was dealing with admin and finance. And the last one to join the team was actually Diana Berisha Mahmouti. She was in charge of the social activities. I forgot the title right now. But in the meantime, we had people coming on and off in short contracts. One of them was Iqbal Erogova, who was doing health education for some months in the field. And then we had Hikmet Jara, who was also working with Cécile Desmoulins, who was the officer. She was working in Podgorica, but then she would cover for Pristina when Yuki was out. And she was the officer in charge. She would come and she would do these social activities. So more or less, this is the core team that started UNICEF. Unfortunately, we lost both Gazmend and Blerim to heart attacks. And, they just left too early.
You have amazing memory, not a single list in front of you to remember the names, but I feel so honored to hear these stories. For the team I'm leading now. So my question to you, what did drive you, Flaka, with this small team of UNICEF professionals back then?
It was the love for your country. So this is what I was trying to explain to any UNICEF or international staff that would come to the country. None of you can love my country more than I can, regardless of how sympathetic you can be, and you can be very supportive and whatever. So it was the love for your country and maybe the chance to see it free at one stage.
One of the key areas which was crucial back then was health, and in particular dealing with the polio and the fact that far too many children here were not vaccinated. A massive vaccination campaign against polio was carried out when you were part of our team, protecting children from this deadly infectious disease. Can you share how did you manage to achieve that vital objective for kids' health?
Sometimes it's a coincidence that will help you. In the times when we were doing the preparations for the polio vaccine, an epidemic in Albania occurred, and it was polio. So the children in Albania, I don't know how many of them got infected, and the information came very close, and it came very quickly. So the people did find out that there was an epidemic happening in Albania and that it could cross the border very easily. Although the people tell me that the viruses do not fly, but there are ways how the viruses come, and it's usually water in the case of polio. And what happened is that the epidemic in Albania happened in the region of Has on the other side. And while we were preparing, we got the information that 8 of our children got the polio. And we had to go to the field and identify them and see how serious it was. And out of the 8 children that we found in the field, unfortunately, a little girl was I don't know, 4 months old, I think. She was blonde. I remember her face. She was beautiful, but she got the polio because she had not been vaccinated on time. So the polio hit her on the four extremities. She could not move her feet or her hands or her arms any longer. And she was the most serious case. The other cases were treatable to a certain point, and then we had reached an agreement with IGALO, spa and medical center in Montenegro that would be treating the children with paraffin and I don't know what else kind of treatments. And we took the 8 children there, but the little girl could not have any improvement on the situation because she was very difficultly, hardly affected. I think even her name was Venera, but I'm not so sure. But she was very beautiful. I remember that. And as a digression, when we went to Igalo to take the kids there, we actually asked them that we could have a nurse from the Mother Teresa team assist the mothers and the children because of the language barrier. That was one, and they approved this decision. It was UNICEF Belgrade that approved it, and we had a nurse going there. And the second was that the doctor that was treating the kids herself was a polio case. But she was the one who was walking with difficulty, but showing the mothers that it can be overcome. And that was psychologically very effective on these families. So when we started the vaccination, the Institute for Public Health, which was then headed by Kominent Tmušić. Dr. Tmušić was a coercive manager. He was appointed by the Serbian government. But when he came to work to the Institute, he said, I am not going to fire any doctor because I need the doctors to do my work. If you want the Institute to function, you have to give me free hands to decide who am I going to keep and who not. And he kept them all, apart from one who had retired himself. And he appointed Dr. Idir Begoli as his deputy. And Idir was fundamental in a lot of things that we were doing in the field. So we needed the support of the Institute of Public Health to know exactly how many children are in the evidence of the vaccination units all over the country. And they came up with a figure of 168,000 kids. And they were insisting all the time that all kids from 0 to 5 should be vaccinated, and that in Kosovo there were always around 50 to 52,000 live children born every year. So the mathematics was not sort of fitting. And in one of the coordination meetings that we did, I asked Dr. Tmušić, I said, Dr. Tmušić, you keep telling me that we have the evidence, you keep telling me that we have to vaccinate from 0 to 5, but I don't see the figures. We should have 250,000 kids who need to be vaccinated. And at one point he said, are you trying to sabotage this thing? I said, no. I'm trying to find the kids so we can vaccinate them all. And if we pretend that we have 50,000 newborns, then we have to find them somewhere. And he was like, well, where can we find them? And in that meeting, we had Dr. Gani Demoli with us. He was the head of the medical section of Mother Teresa. And I said, Gani, can you ask Mother Teresa to do the registration of kids from house to house? And he said, yes. So there were 7,000 activists of Mother Teresa that were going from home to home and registering all the children. And at the end, we had a census of 234,000 kids who were there and could be vaccinated. So that was good. So there was, the social mobilization was social mobilization because you had people who had understood the seriousness of the problem first. They understood that they could trust us because we had a very big problem with the vaccines. The vaccines were being produced in Belgrade. And then one of the eminent professionals came out and he said, you should not take this vaccine because they can, kill our children or poison them or whatever. And this created us a very big problem. And the only way we could go back to the people and tell them that the vaccines were safe, we said, okay, we're going to take them to London, have them checked, get a certificate from the laboratory, and come back to you and show you the lab results, and then, just do it. And this is what we did, actually. We took the vaccines to London, to a referent laboratory, got back the reports, went back to the communities, then accessed religious leaders. We asked them to dedicate the masses or the prayer days to the vaccination. And the first day of the vaccination was like impressive. It was like impressive.
So how was that first day of the vaccination campaign?
It was, for us, it was like we did something great. You had that feeling that, all these efforts that you did at the end had a good result. And the good result was that everybody was coming voluntarily to get the vaccines. And I was telling in one of the occasions when we went to Jonaj in Prizren, there was a lady coming with 9 kids to the vaccination, and then we went to the vaccination point, and we asked her, well, you brought the children, 9 of them. She said, no, 10. I said, 10 what? She said she had a newborn carrying under the shoulder here, and she said, the baby too got the vaccine. So it was impressive. And we actually managed to vaccinate over 234,000 kids. And we continued with the same intensity until the war started, because during the war then it was very difficult to do the vaccination, but we still did it, but it was like, very, very difficult.
A vaccination is the most effective prevention measure to protect kids from infectious diseases like polio. However, even today, or even more today, a lot of misinformation parents have. What advice would you give us how to address that?
Your example would... Everybody should use their own example to convey a message. I'm a person that insists that vaccination should be obligatory and that the kids should get the vaccines, because I think that this is the best way in order to prevent whatever kind of diseases. I even myself get a flu shot every year, and I keep on telling people, get it, because it's going to help you. I'm not very fan of those who are anti-vaxxers and, tell you all these things. And I will always give them the argument that every time that I get a flu vaccine, I will pass the flu on foot, not as before, lying for a week with high temperature. I think that the issue is that how to make it more acceptable to the parents that the children should be vaccinated. It's to tell them in simple words what are the effects. Because if you have a doctor coming to you and giving you all these medical terms, explaining to you what can it do, nobody will understand. So you would need to, of course, use phrases which are popular that can convey the message and do believe in what they're saying, and say it in simple words. And it's better to have a sane child than have a child that has to have, like the case of little Venera, which I believe her name is Venera, having the need to have assistance all her life because the vaccination was late. She was late to get the vaccine, and she lost both her movement in her arms and legs. So it's not nice to be very graphic about some things, but really, when you explain a consequence, sometimes maybe you should be brutal about it. But the less images of children that you use, the better.
In my family, my uncle, my father's middle brother, lived in a time when there was no vaccination available, and he got polio. And for the rest of his life, it was a tragedy of our family. Yeah. He survived, but he was a disabled person with difficulty to walk. good news for Kosovo, thanks to your efforts and your colleagues' efforts many years back. In 2002, Kosovo was announced free of wild polio, which is also part of a global effort to eradicate polio altogether. So I really hope the parents will take the informed decision and protect their children.
Me too. And yes, I remember that I got a diploma issued by the Institute of Public Health that we are polio-free, which was good.
Indeed.
Yeah.
From health to education.
Yeah.
Another area which has always been a big priority for UNICEF. In Kosovo, UNICEF led the reconstruction of 140 schools, which eventually helped 100,000 students to get access to education. It was during your time when a major efforts were there to mobilize support for this area of work. How did you balance back then in the area of education this urgent need for physical rehabilitation with psychological support to students and help them learn in the circumstances back then?
When we returned from Macedonia, we needed to know exactly what the situation in the field was. And for some time, we were all told not to go to the field because we didn't know what the situation with the mines was around the villages and so on. So we had to be very careful in coordinating with different units and so on. In any case, what we did is we organized an education cluster, or team of NGOs that were interested in getting involved in education, and we would hold coordination meetings with them. And our first decision was actually to make a survey and ask each one of them to go to a certain municipality and go from school to school and, put the evidence in what conditions are every single building we had. So we had these organizations go to almost all villages, and we covered over 1,000 school buildings, which were basic schools and then also the parallel units of these schools in different villages. And out of that, we found out that around 40% of the buildings were in bad shape, of which 136 were completely destroyed. And we thought of the urgency. What was important for us? It was important to start schooling regardless of whether we had the conditions or not. The teachers had come back in large numbers. Many others had left also, but there were ways to actually replace these people in the schools. Now, in terms of infrastructure, wherever we could bring desks and chairs, we would, and this is what we actually did from Macedonia camps. When we bought the desks and chairs for the camp schools that we opened there, we said the moment we're back, we're taking them back because it's ours, it's for our schools, and we did that. So we would take them to municipalities that needed, let's say, desks and chairs, whose infrastructure was better off and where the children could go to school. And then plan B was what to do with the schools that are destroyed. There were no homes that could be used as parallel spaces for schools and so on. So we decided to build up tents. And the reason behind it was that we would, with the tents, push the donors to actually bring more money in order to have the schools be built earlier. If I refused, at that time I was in charge of the education program when we returned, and I was asked, would I go for the plastic sheeting and these kind of things that we could use to actually, just adjust or adapt the buildings? And I said, no containers, because the containers were an option. I said, the moment the container comes, nobody will move it out because they'll say, they're safe. They have a roof. They are not cold, blah, blah. So we said, okay, we established the schools in the field on tents. And this is what we did. And we opened them, and it was very effective because the tents were special. So they had the heating, and then we had the flooring and the desks and the chairs. The kids could attend schools. They were not very cold. And just imagine that the winters then were much colder than now. Okay. There was a lot of snow on that year. It was freezing cold. But the kids could attend classes in tents. And then at the end, the donors would come and say, But how can the people go to school in tents? Let's make them a school. And this is why we managed to actually reconstruct all the schools somewhere by, I don't know, spring of the year 2000. So it took us around 7 to 8 months to actually complete all the schools, and that was a great success.
Talking about education, the world is changing big time, but you know about UNICEF education framework, emergency framework. If to put all that together, what's your view how to give the best education to children nowadays in this digital age? What are your views?
I don't know. You catch me by surprise because I am shocked by the revolution of artificial intelligence, and I really do not have an answer to that. I cannot tell you. My fear with the children, and something that we have been seeing here all the time, is that our children do not read. And if you do not read, you will never comprehend more than what you are being served on social media or on repetition of blah, blah, whoever is talking about whatever topic. I would be happy if there would be somebody who can come up with an idea of how to make the children read books, read content which is outside of the social media, that they can learn something from that. You know, I remember the times when we were kids. We had no internet. We had encyclopedias and had books. So if we had to find out something, we would go and go to the library and try to find a book and so. This does not happen now with this generation, and I'm very worried, especially with the quality of the education in my country now.
What are two top things for the education in Kosovo, which in your view should happen for the quality to improve?
I think I might be biased, but I think that the problem is, the way I see it from the outside, not being part of the system, is that the problem is with the teaching staff, first of all. And the second one is the system, you know. We have much less children now than we had 26 years ago, 27 years ago. In the times when we were doing emergency, we had 400,000 children in the school system. Now it's less, about half. My problem is that if you have, I still cannot understand public schools. There's a public schools where my niece is attending classes now. Her class has 35 children. 35 children. The teacher cannot even be, if she even were Wonder Woman, she cannot handle 35 children within a day. So instead of thinking of training the teachers to have a different approach to teaching, to have it more interactive, something that we are late. We could have done it, but we are late because we were about all the time insisting on the traditional system of the ex cathedra. I'm talking to you, listen to me, and you will learn something, unfortunately. And it could have been different. So the teaching staff needs new training. There needs to be a reform, you know, but we have started the reforms like 4 times until now in the past 27 years, and none of them has gone further than a month in that reform. And I think that the reform should be done by somebody from the outside that will understand the context of this. So if you have the Finnish example that can be replicated here, bring in somebody that can help you do that change. And I don't say that the reform will happen tomorrow, but it needs to start. And if it doesn't start, we will never reform our educational system. Again, children need to read to understand what is happening around.
Absolutely. The foundational knowledge and skills must be there. And then, of course, what you were mentioning, critical thinking, analytical thinking should come in this world, and it's super complex. Getting back to UNICEF, since we were created 80 years ago, the world changed big time. What would be your advice to UNICEF? How should we adjust to these new realities?
I don't know, because I'm out of touch with UNICEF. So I've left UNICEF a long time ago, and I'm still following you from the distance, not very I don't know what to do, because I don't think that UNICEF will be able to survive without the support of the countries that were generous enough to support all the activities of the organizations in different parts of the world. Without that support, UNICEF is going to disappear. Because without money, you cannot function. And we could see that in the field in the times when we had a very limited budget, but still doing miracles in the field, because it was our presence that made the difference. And I don't know, UNICEF maybe should be more, let's say, be less theoretical in terms of communicating with institutions and trying to guide them, and be more practical in the field. I guess it's because I was always a field person that I was missing this all the time. It was the emergency that gave us actually the chance to be in the field all the time and see what the needs were and how things could change. I don't know. I really don't know. It's difficult for me because I'm not part of it.
But thanks for your reflections. Indeed, the resources are going down. The multilateralism system overall beyond UNICEF is under pressure. On the other hand, the needs of children are huge. In that, we need to prioritize as well as UNICEF, as many other organizations working for the children's rights and well-being of children. If you were the executive director of UNICEF, having our organization in 190 countries and territories across the world, what would be 3 priorities you would focus on for children?
Health, of course, education second, and what would be the third one? Logically, the health of the mother, because without the mother, then the children, it's going to be difficult for them to actually develop. But these would be the 3 ones. I'm not neglecting the psychosocial support that the children would need and so on and so forth, but this is the basics. And I think that psychosocial support somehow can get involved into the health program, try to squeeze in some elements within different programs so you can offer more without having the pretension of saying, now we need a huge office with 55 officers to do all these things, because there are possibilities for less staff to do more. And maybe this would be an advice for UNICEF.
What gives you hope for the future generations?
It's always, it's in my nature. So if either you hope for a better world, and what gives me hope is that the kids that are being born now are much more intelligent than we are, because they have more access to technology. But again, I hope that they're going to use their intelligence in a much proper and better and prosperous way, although there are always going to be wars, because the people are as they are, and they will always fight for their own interests. They don't care about the universality of the issues. And I only hope that they are going to be clever enough not to get involved into any kind of big fusses and big wars, because a war is a very ugly thing.
And my final ask and question: any motivational message from you to those who are doing their best these days to support children and youth in Kosovo and worldwide?
Keep it up and don't give up. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.